Okay. You can just look at the screen for a second so people can get in, okay? We are broadcasting now. Okay, 10 people. Is the sound fine? Everyone is hearing me?
Everything fine.
Okay. We're not very British in timing today. We're 3 minutes late.
At least we have Richard with us.
Irish time.
I was actually worried you weren't going to show up.
Me too.
Yeah, it's so great to see you. We were afraid. It's true.
Well, I understand many artists, they are from the behind the scene, even though they have big egos, they're from behind the scene. Yeah, they're from os bastidores, não é, Angela?
Yeah, retaguarda, the backstage.
Yeah, but we'll be fine. It's very easy going. Ok. Boa tarde. Hoje, dia 28 de março de 2021, é o nosso último dia no Festival Transatlântico. Mais um dia a gente tem a Ângela Ferreira, Ângela Berlinde, conosco, né, Ângela? E o Richard Mosse. É Moose or Moss?
Moss, like the green furry stuff.
Like the moss, ok. E é um prazer enorme, né? Ontem tivemos o mesmo desafio de conversar em inglês e traduzir na medida que é possível, porque às vezes a conversa e as respostas vão tomando formas, né, longas e tão subjetivas e tão pessoais que é até difícil de fazer uma tradução real, né? Então a gente realmente conta com a capacidade de cada um em conseguir acompanhar a nossa conversa, né, Ângela?
Sim, vamos tentar melhor.
E o Richard é um jovem artista, nascido em 1980, né? Então ele está com 41 anos de idade. É um fotógrafo documentarista, né? Nas próprias palavras dele, ele paira entre a arte contemporânea e a fotografia documental, jornalística, né? Mas, desde que ele começou a trabalhar, ele vem com uma proposta visual muito diferente, no sentido que ele questiona a forma tradicional, os meios tradicionais de fazer uma investigação por meio das técnicas, né? Então, na série, por exemplo, que nós trouxemos aqui para o festival, que é a série Infra, ele foi para uma zona de guerra, né, na República Democrática do Congo, e fotografou com filme infravermelho em 8x10 polegadas, né, ou seja, filme de grande formato, que é uma coisa realmente incrível. Só de pensar que ele tenha carregado isso nas costas ao longo de tanto tempo é realmente incrível. E depois disso ele fez inúmeros trabalhos também que todos questionam o suporte, né, o suporte tradicional usado para fazer uma pesquisa visual, né? Ele fala que o trabalho dele se propõe a ver as partes não vistas, né? E isso pode ser interpretado de muitas formas, né, Ângela? E é isso, com vocês aqui agora, então, está o Richard, e welcome, Richard. I made just a brief introduction about your work, very, very superficial. Well, welcome, and thank you very much for participating.
Thanks, Christian, and thanks, Angela, and thank you to everyone for dialing in on your Sunday.
Yeah. Well, we're all in lockdown, so they have nothing better to do.
The best program, yeah. Hello, Richard. I'm so glad that you are here after the adventure in Beijing, in the installation in Photo Biennale Beijing in 2018. Remember, so much things changed after that.
How could I forget? Yes.
Yes, that was a massive thing. But well, it's so a huge honor to have you here, Christian. It's already translated that welcoming you here to the Festival of Transatlantico, and introduce already your work. That your work presents a new kind of subjectivity, and it's also pairing between the social critique and the values of society. And also you are sometimes in your career you are frustrated with documental photography. Yes, but also it was interesting to see that your work, you are of course belong to a young generation. I think the most that influenced more the contemporary art, and you expanded conventional ways of approaching the medium, and also because you address questions that means to create pictures in a so increasingly image saturated world. And well, I think maybe you can introduce a little bit how you included, of course, today we'll of course speak about Infra, your work that is of course presented in Transatlantico, and your work capture the complex realities of flux, loss, and destruction. Can you explain me a little bit about your process, what you, about your work, about Infra? Can you explain the unseen aspect of this conflict in between 2010 and 2015?
Yeah, sure.
We can start by this process.
I actually prepared a little
that's great.
sort of slideshow presentation. So if it's possible, I will try to share my screen.
Okay.
And
go right ahead.
Share screen. Share screen. And then I have to go to my keynote. And then press play. Can you all read that? Yeah, it's looking good.
No, I cannot see you yet. I cannot see your screen yet. Não consigo ver a tela.
Can you, Angela?
No.
Interesting. Course, everything. Oh, I haven't pressed share yet, have I? Entire screen.
Yeah, you need to put play.
Okay, it's here. Okay,
great.
Go right ahead. So you just have to,
That's
okay. I'm gonna put the full screen on, okay? Maybe it's best. Let me try. Okay.
Great. Well, okay, so just before I get to Infra, I just wanted to explain a little bit about what I suppose, where I'm coming from and what Infra came out of, essentially. And I'm going to go right to basically to the start of my career 20 years ago, when I was a young man, 20-year-old. And I was looking around, and basically before I go into any of that stuff, I just want to say that my practice is sort of situated between documentary photography and contemporary art. Those are two very different kinds of things. For example, documentary photography is at its strongest is a way of saying, I've seen this and I want you to know this has happened. I want you to see it too. And when it does that well, such as in this image, it's extremely powerful and can change the course of history. Whereas this is a piece by Alfredo Jarre. So this is a good example of contemporary art. And this is also photography. So what he's done, Jarre, I'm sure many of you know his work. He's seminal Chilean artist. He went to Rwanda right after the genocide to try to find a way of representing such an extraordinary catastrophe. And he ran into a little girl called Gutete Emerita, a young woman who had seen horrific massacres during the genocide, I think she'd lost her family members, etc. And so her eyes said it all, just her eyes. So Alfredo Jarre was so moved by the look in her eyes, which had seen these things, these horrors, that he just took a simple slide photograph of her eyes. And then he reproduced it on this massive light box 1 million times, the same image of her eyes. So he's entering the language of, or I suppose, the power of the sublime, the faculty of the sublime. In this case, the mathematical sublime, the failure of our imagination to fully comprehend the scale of these horrors and to try to quantitatively succeed through the faculty of reason to explain that. So contemporary art has a whole different set of powers and abilities, potentialities, than documentary photography, but they're both together extremely powerful. And I suppose I see these as the two poles that I exist between my work and my practice.
Mm-hmm.
So as a young man, going way back here, but I was living in Berlin, and I was a dishwasher in an Irish pub, and my dream was to be as a photojournalist, of course. So I bought my Nikon camera, and away I went down to the post-war Balkan nations of, Kosovo, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, which at that time were still very tense, especially Kosovo. The war had only just stopped, and a lot of civic unrest still happening. And my chosen subject was to try to document the missing persons crisis. So there were hundreds of thousands of people who were still missing after the war. And the reason they'd never come home is because they were in hidden mass graves all around the country. And a lot of these mass graves still haven't been found, actually. So this was a really difficult thing for all the populations, of course, and because families can't find closure, they can't bury their loved ones, and they can't put the past behind them and look to the future. And that's really an important part of obviously justice, but also forming peace and resolving conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was struggling because I had a Nikon camera. I was running around taking pictures of essentially an absence.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, these people were missing.
Yeah.
So I couldn't concretely put them in front of my lens because they weren't there, literally.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very frustrated with the I suppose the orthodoxies of reportage photography, the quite reductive, in my opinion, limiting and rather conservative language of photojournalism, because I was trying to depict, portray, represent something really complicated and really abstract and really big, and I couldn't. I failed. So, as Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail again, fail better.
Again. Yes, fail better. Yes.
So I went back to Berlin, sold my Nikon camera. I traded it in for a Linhof 4x5 view camera, a large format camera, which takes 4x5 sheets of film. And at this time, I was really looking around at what contemporary art was doing, contemporary art photographers like Thomas Struth or Uri Gerst, or, Thomas, a lot of these very interesting photographers finding approaches to describe similar things. For example, Struth's early work looks carefully at the urban environment of Germany, which he called embarrassed landscapes, these cities that had been rebuilt after the war, the sort of embarrassment of the war. So you could read, in his opinion, and I believe he's absolutely right, in his photos, you could read the sort of embarrassment of that trauma. So I tried to take that approach in my own way, and I began documenting aspects of the missing person crisis and trying to read elements of the conflict in the architecture, in the lived environment, the land. And one of the things I began to look at was this extraordinary, a series of churches were being destroyed by Kosovo Albanians during civic unrest in 2004. And they were, it's actually, technically, it's a form of ethnic cleansing. It's when you destroy heritage, it's a kind of genocide. Just like Kristallnacht during the 1930s, before World War II, same sort of thing. But so I made this diptych. I was in Goldsmiths College at the time in London, and I made this diptych. And from Kosovo, the name of the country with an O is a Serb Orthodox word. Sorry, it's a Serbian word. Whereas Kosovo Albanians, they say it with an A, Kosova. So even the name of the country itself is contested.
It's interesting, yeah.
And so I felt that this exterior view of this church is from very much a Kosovo Serbian perspective, but the interior, looking out through that hole at this brave new Kosovo Albanian world, is the Kosovo Albanian view. So I was looking at the same thing from two angles, and then when I was at Yale, again I struggled with a project along the US-Mexican border, looking at illegal immigration. It was peaking at that time, as it is now. And again, this is a really hard thing to describe because with a camera, because you can't generally see these people crossing, because they do so in the middle of the night at places that are hard to spot. And here I was using this wooden large format camera. In this case, I'd moved 8x10" large format. And I was looking, yeah.
Would you mind if I stop for a second just to try to put in perspective in Portuguese? before you go into Mexico?
Sorry, yes. Yeah.
No, because you're going very well. It's perfect.
It's fantastic,
But
yeah.
I won't be able to process everything, even though I'm going to try to resume it so you can come back. Bem, eu faço, Ângela?
Sim, muito rapidamente, sim, sim.
Olha, rapidamente, a minha pergunta para o Richard foi, da Ângela, foi para o Richard, enfim, falar sobre o conceito do trabalho dele, né? Pegando desde o início, tentando
Fazer um contexto.
um contexto também do trabalho que a gente apresenta aqui no festival. E ele, na verdade, ele está fazendo uma apresentação colocando, vamos dizer assim, em dois lados da balança, o que seria o conceito da fotografia documental, jornalística tradicional, e aí ele pegou aquela imagem que é hiper conhecida, né, da menina fugindo de um ataque napalm, que é considerada uma fotografia realmente jornalística, que está ali para dar uma informação direta, provar que o autor esteve lá e viu aquilo, e aquilo de fato aconteceu. E, por outro lado, ele mostrou uma instalação de Alfredo Jarre, né, que foi para Ruanda. O genocídio de Ruanda foi quando, hein? No início dos anos 2000? Não, meados dos anos 90, né?
90, final de 90. Sim.
E ele representou a fotografia num sentido bastante conceitual, né? Ele pegou a foto dessa menina que teve toda a família dela assassinada e fotografou o rosto dela, parece que ela estava chorando, e aí ele fez a reprodução desse mesmo fotograma milhares de vezes e colocou em cima da mesa, tá? Então ele está tentando entrar na questão, no aspecto conceitual do que leva ele a fazer esse trabalho, né? De propor uma nova perspectiva para um trabalho documental e conceitual dentro de um ambiente que eu até consideraria mais arte contemporânea. E aí ele deu o primeiro exemplo, né, ele jovem, sei lá, devia ter uns 17, 18 anos de idade, lavando pratos, assim como eu também lavei pratos nessa idade na Europa. E foi na época da Guerra do Kosovo, né, que isso
Kosovo,
foi
sim.
91, 92. E ele teve a primeira câmera dele, ele foi lá fotografar, inspirado, querendo ser um fotojornalista, um fotógrafo documentarista, e ele queria fotografar as pessoas, né, as vítimas dessa guerra, só que ele não os encontrava, né? Não é isso, Ângela? Pode continuar por aí?
Sim, então, havia, na verdade, uma frustração do Richard, porque ele procurava, obviamente, fazer um retrato deste lugar, lugares de conflito, de guerra, e encontrava retratos de ausência, porque as pessoas simplesmente ou estavam fugidas, ou, obviamente, havia morte e perda, e portanto, aqui há aqui uma reflexão da parte do Richard, em que ele, na verdade, sempre tentou transitar entre aquilo que é a fotografia, a arte contemporânea e a fotografia documental. Richard, we were talking about the way you were struggling between these two poles, yes, between contemporary art and documentary photography. And actually, we were already introducing that you were frustrated, that find absence.
And then we get to Mexico. You can go back to there. I'm going to put the screen on, okay? Okay, Mexico.
So I'm at Yale University because I got kicked out of Goldsmiths because they told me I'm not an artist. Clearly, they're right.
Oh no.
But Yale was a very productive time for me. I really enjoyed it, and I did a lot of different projects. But one of them was along the Mexican-U.S. border, and as I was saying, so these illegal immigrants are very hard to find. Naturally, because they're hiding and they cross at very remote locations, usually at night. So I again was struck with, I suppose, an abstraction, something I couldn't put in front of my lens, and so again I was frustrated. But this time, I suppose I spent a long time traveling up and down the border, looking for, always on the US side, looking for traces of those journeys. And I found things like this white bottle, which had been left by volunteers for thirsty immigrants who'd come across the desert walking and might need a drink of water, fresh water. And that's a nice little trace. The bivouac, people might have even slept under there. And that's a nice way, I suppose, of pointing at the journey. And I began to build up my own language. And for example, once I was driving on the side of the road near Tecate, a small village in Southern California, and I noticed this bag by the side of the road. And I thought, that's very strange. So I opened the bag up. I stopped the car first and opened the bag up and found all of these, this sort of mise en scène of a woman's life and she had children, obviously, too. There's sunglasses, there's gel for your knees and your hips if they start, or on your feet if they start getting pain. They have mosquito repellent, refried beans, toothpaste, toothbrush, but also children's toys. You can't see them in this image, but they're at the bottom of that. And a little psalm, Spanish language, a Bible. And on the left is interesting. There's a card advertising an English language training center in Fresno, California. So this definitely was the belongings of an illegal immigrant who fled. And that, as I was taking the image, a border patrol came running around the corner. He'd obviously seen them, and they had to run away very quickly. And so I packed everything back up in the bag, and I hope they found it. But this was a really interesting, when I found this particular arrangement of objects on the side of the river, Rio Grande River in Laredo, Texas, I was really, I suppose, challenged because I couldn't say whether these things were just garbage, trash that just happened to be there, or whether they were the left behind by illegal immigrants making their way. Now, they often do cross the river at Laredo, but who knows whether they do so here. This could have just been a garbage dump, but the objects within, that right at my feet that I was looking at began to tell the story very well for me. We have a Gonzo toy. We have a Stars and Stripes rag doll, which is a kind of a toy of Americana, part of the dream of going to America, perhaps. Dora the Explorer shoe. Imagine if you're walking across the Sonoran Desert, you're kind of Dora the Explorer if you're a kid. And then in the middle, you have a page from the Yellow Brick Road, but it's not any page. It's the page where the Tin Woodman says, "I will cut down some trees and make a raft." The scarecrow volunteered to push the raft across the river with a pole. So here we are right at the banks of the Rio Grande, and it's talking about crossing the river. And of course, the Yellow Brick Road or the Wizard of Oz rather, is a seminal piece of Americana also. So I stepped, at this point, I stepped away from the reportage photography even further. I suppose I left behind because I crossed the line into a more literary space. So I couldn't verify whether any of these things had any relation at all to illegal immigrants whatsoever. But at this point, for me to tell the story, it didn't matter. There's a truth with a capital T, and then there's a truth with a small t. And perhaps this is truth with a small t. It's a kind of literary truth. And sometimes fiction can tell complicated narratives in a much more vivid, compelling, and adequate way than the hard-boiled documentary image can. So this was a real threshold for me. And after Yale, I worked embedded with the US Army, and I was trying to document their sort of occupation of Saddam Hussein's palace architecture across Iraq. He had about 84 palaces all around Iraq, and a lot of them were very poorly built, but very pompously built, very gaudy, huge ornamental chandeliers and gigantic teapots, ornamental teapots with, in the courtyards, and with moats full of apparently killer fish and all this. But the US military's occupation of this architecture with their own very provisional, functional military architecture within it was fascinating to me. For example, this fella, he's smoking a cigar whilst pumping iron in Al Faw Palace in Baghdad. Very strange, incongruous juxtaposition of I suppose, the architectures of power. And then I suppose you guys might want to
Yes.
wrap that up before I jump into Congo.
No, but you were almost revealing your Kodachrome film.
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting the way you shift from the documental and then realize that you can, of course, explore more deep the narratives and reality if you use fiction, using, of course, your words. So that means then, yes, you can of course you shift exactly more or less in this time when in 2010 you started with Infra. So can you explain how everything started?
Yeah, sure. So at that point, I began to get even more frustrated with documentary photography, and I was really always pushing at its limits and finding those limits in terms of its language and trying to expose them, but also to push past them to find an alternate way of speaking, hopefully more adequate one. But at around 2009, then Kodak announced on its road to bankruptcy, it announced the discontinuation of a very specific kind of film called Kodak Aerochrome, which was designed in World War II in collaboration with the US military. And its purpose at that point was specifically for camouflage detection. And so camouflage is green usually, right? And the landscape is usually green. So green on green is very hard to see. So the military really needed another way of seeing. And so they went to Kodak and they said, look, was there any way we can take aerial photographs that show us these enemy installations without them being hidden by the camouflage? And they thought about it, and the scientists said, well, actually, infrared light, which is invisible to the human eye, behaves in a very different way to visible light. So the infrared light, which doesn't have a color, by the way, it's not pink or red or fuchsia or anything. It's invisible. But it bounces off chlorophyll in healthy plants and foliage back into the atmosphere. Whereas anything that is sort of dead matter, or shall we say, not a healthy green plant, tends to absorb the infrared light. And so it totally reveals these enemy installations quite brilliantly. And so they, for, I suppose, reasons of color contrast and ease of perception, and they decided to make the infrared more in the red-pink scale with this particular film. And other things would go green or blue or whatever. Anyway, it was also used in a very interesting moment in the late 60s. Exactly. It was sort of synonymous with the psychedelic movement of the countercultural movement in the United States during the Vietnam War. So it's very interesting because you have the film itself was being widely used by the US military at this time to target Viet Cong installations and bomb them and kill them in North and across Vietnam. At the same time, you have the young people, the popular culture of the U.S. counterculture, who were trying to, I suppose, and by the way, this was an extremely anti-war movement, but they were, I suppose, appropriating that film stock for their album covers. And it wasn't just Frank Zappa. There was loads of album covers, artwork and posters. This film really sort of became synonymous with the psychedelic movement at that time. So there's a very interesting tension within the medium, the film medium at that moment in history. And then in 2009 it was discontinued, and that's when I decided, well, this is my last chance to experiment with this. And I began thinking, I suppose, more philosophically about how it can reveal the unseen, this film, how it can detect the hidden enemy in the landscape, and what could I do with that as a photographer, as an artist? How could I use that in my next project, or to tell my story more powerfully? And at the same time, I was researching the conflict in Eastern Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. In the east, there's a vicious cycle of conflict and war, massacres, sexual violence, horrific human rights violations have been going on there since the Rwandan genocide, which kind of spilled across the border. That happened in 1994, and it spilled across the border into this very sort of vast, remote parts of Eastern Congo, and all these armed groups with, essentially a nation in exile, moved across the border, and with their armed groups very well trained, and as a result, they began. And there's a lot of rare earth minerals, very valuable minerals in these hills. As well as
Is this around Goma?
This shot is in South Kivu, so it's nearer to Bukavu. But yeah, Goma is on the north side of the Lake Kivu, and this is nearer Bukavu. In any case, this image shows you rather well how the film is able to detect, dead matter. For example, the track in the foreground, the pathway, is bright cyan green, and that's because it's been trodden on, so there's no living plants there. Whereas everything else is around it is nice, healthy green plants. So we can really pick out the sort of parts of the landscape that are not
they're dead.
Growing. Yeah. And so the specifics of Eastern Congo's cycle of conflict. Well, if you read around the subject and get to know it a bit, there's one statistic by the International Rescue Committee, the IRC. They said in a 10-year period, 5.4 million people are said to have died of war-related causes in Eastern Congo alone. So that's a huge number of people. Huge. Now that's a projected estimate. It's not a accurate body count, but they did a lot of research to get to that number. And I suppose what I was thinking was, well, why didn't we hear about this in the Western newspapers? Why isn't anyone talking about it? Is there some failure of journalism going on here, of storytelling? Because at that same time, in Sudan, we had the Darfur genocide, and that was, everyone was talking about that, and a lot was getting a lot more column inches, shall we say, in the newspaper than the situation in Congo, where people were dying at a much higher frequency. Not to say that, I think it was extremely important that people talked about the genocide in Darfur, and something needed to be done, and it was done. But I think the reason it was getting more attention was because legally it was genocide. In Congo, the conflict is not technically genocide. It's still horrific, though. And then also just in terms of sound bites and easy, pithy communication, the situation in Sudan was very sort of, how would I say it, binary. You have these well-armed Janjaweed fighters coming from the north, these Arab fighters coming from the north of Sudan, coming down to these unarmed black animist communities, unarmed people, civilians, and massacring them. And so it was very sort of good and evil, and it was as a result, it was a very simple story to tell. Whereas in Congo, we have an entrenched cycle of violence being carried out by, I think it's at least 80 different armed groups. And all of them are fighting for different things. Some of them have forgotten what they're fighting for because they've been fighting for so long. It's intergenerational, and the corruption is just endemic. It's inherent to everything there. And you also have the National Army, who are really corrupt, and they're extorting local civilian populations. And so little villages and communities would form their own armed groups called the Mai Mai groups, and these were undisciplined. Very dangerous rebels, I suppose, with AK-47s, a very powerful weapon. And some of them believed they were literally bulletproof. And so that, it's a kaleidoscope of tragedy, which is just too complicated to unravel for most, I suppose, most forms of journalism. You need very lengthy United Nations reports to try to begin to unpick some of these narratives and explain them, or big books explaining the history of Congo. And unfortunately, that doesn't translate too well for news journalism. So as a result, people don't really hear about it. So there was my failure. There's something about this war in Congo that's inherently unseen or overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
And here I have this film that can actually help me reveal the invisible
Mm-hmm.
light of infrared. So I personally felt, well, that's interesting on a metaphoric
Mm-hmm.
level. We have these sort of matching a medium that somehow matches this problem of storytelling, at least for me. And this was very much in the early days an experiment. And I didn't really know what I'd come back with. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, Richard, how long did you spend there?
I worked there
on this project
in total for 5 years, from 2010 to 2015.
Okay.
And I would be flying in for 2 months at a time, flying back to New York to process the film. And, you know, some years, busy years, I would spend 6 or 8, maybe 8 months in Congo, in and out, because I had to process the film. And then, it ended in 2015. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but beauty, but you combine beauty in a similar way. So, of course, when you saw the images for the first time, I'm sure you falling in love. And how was your relationship with that images, and how do you think beauty can give the end to the suffering?
Well, it took me a long time for this project to gestate. After my first trip, I took these images on my first trip, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't, to be quite frank, actually, I was loading, because I didn't believe in the project yet. I was loading on one side of the dark slide, normal Kodak portrait film, your normal film. And on the other, I was loading aerochrome, because I thought, well, I better hedge my bets here, because, you know, the aerochrome might be really bad. And at least I got some nice pictures with normal film if it doesn't work out.
So you're doing both. That's great.
Yeah, initially I was, because I hadn't sort of fully.
That's a good idea.
Fallen in love.
Like every photographer do this.
But over time, I started believing in the project, and I got a Guggenheim Fellowship to fund it, and that really helped with my confidence, and as a result, I was off to the races at that point, and I became much more comfortable working in those parts of Congo. Became more the imagery became more intimate and stronger, but different. I mean, sometimes the earlier portraits were very confrontational, and there's a real tension in them. That's largely because of my fear.
I know.
And I think that makes for a powerful image, actually. But when you start to become less fearful, when you know the territory, you can make a different kind of image.
Yeah. So you dare to make portraits?
But I'm there to make portraits and landscapes. But this is a portrait of a young rebel he's fighting for the APCLS. And he's a child soldier who's wearing, as you can see, a SpongeBob SquarePants t-shirt alongside his AK-47, which says a great deal about, how sad this is, because, being press ganged as a child into a brutal armed group. I met many of them. And I just wanted to play a little video of a show. I just opened a big retrospective of my work, 20 years of work in Bologna, in a foundation called MAST Foundation. And they put together this little video just showing some of the works, sort of a walkthrough. And I just wanted to show you this because it shows the scale of some of the works. I'm working with ultra large formats sometimes, and 8x10 has a huge amount of detail. So you really get, it was also for the medium format I was using, for the portraits I was using medium format 120, 6x7 cm. So there's real leaps in scale, and it was a pleasure to work on this, on this retrospective, because I hadn't seen a lot of this work for a long time, Is
this the trip that you had to return from Brazil when you were here?
Yes, yeah, that was right, yeah. Christian, I was meant to meet Christian, but I had to run back to the European Union because they have very intense quarantine laws for anyone who's been in Brazil, as I'm sure you're aware. Yeah. So I had to go into hiding 14 days. But the show, go on.
Before you speak about the show, let me just ask you one question. It's actually, I'm going to end the question in one of your quotes, okay? The aestheticizing of suffering. It's a very difficult word to say in English. Aesthetização in Portuguese. The aestheticization of suffering. You know,
Yes.
I remember in the 90s, was something widely discussed and criticized, and I remember clearly this would go around Sebastião Salgado's work, okay? Especially his work. And I read a quote where you say that I take issue with the idea of that someone shouldn't engage to employ, and that aesthetics can be seen as the opposite of anesthetic, awakening the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Could you tell me about this a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So,
yeah,
as we all know, anesthetics put us to
yeah.
sleep.
Yeah, of course.
But aesthetics can do the opposite. It has the power.
Yeah.
It has the power to wake us up and to see more clearly, and to heighten our perceptions. And I believe that, and I've said this before, that beauty is the sharpest tool in the box, in terms of helping us to communicate and helping, helping people, storytellers, to tell a story in a more adequate way.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, like, Congo's a bloody beautiful place. It's a really beautiful place. So
I have been there twice. It's a beautiful place.
It's
true. Yeah.
And I feel to try to make it look ugly would be somehow morally reprehensible. And I think that a lot of photojournalism, it does exactly that. It tries to, it's a lot, I suppose, as Susan Sontag said, photojournalism tends to attempt to avoid the crisis of ethics and aesthetics by flying low, as she says, under the radar, and by adopting a very lo-fi, grungy, grainy black and white aesthetic, which would seem to be a kind of non-aestheticized approach to the conflict, to human suffering, which actually isn't, because it's simply just another form of aesthetics. It's equally aestheticized as any other aesthetic choice you can make. But I suppose that it's trying not to be beautiful, because there's a tension, obviously, when you start to represent human suffering in a beautiful way. And that upsets people for good reason. But maybe that tension could also be employed to discomfort the viewer deliberately, to push against these orthodoxies, like, representing a conflict of this scale with these luscious pinks and reds there's something absurd about it, preposterous, but also, it really forces the viewer to think about the situation and the ways in which we represent these narratives. At least it did for me, and that's half the battle as an artist, to find things that help you, get inspired and get out of the bed in the morning, go and make the work. Moving swiftly on, I want to just show you a wee clip from The Enclave, which is a 6-screen, double-sided screen video installation, also shot in Congo, about the conflict, with 16mm aerochrome. So we were very lucky. We found the 16mm version of the film, and we ran that through an ARRI SR2 as a type of camera with a Steadicam, and produced this rather dreamlike, strange, immersive video with a 10.1 surround sound by Ben Frost, who's an incredible composer.
It's amazing,
and it's haunting. Shows scenes, sort of episodes of the conflict, refugee camps, simulated battle by the rebels, directed by them, but also real fighting. We were stuck in the middle of the Battle of Goma, got a lot of footage of live conflict as well. And we stitch it together in this immersive way with Ben's audio, and it becomes extremely visceral, and the hair begins to almost stand up on the back of your neck. And it's a haunting piece that it had its power at the time, and we were showing it again in Bologna, and we showed it all around Europe. And a lot of people, especially in Europe, were very interested to understand the impact of their nation's colonial past, and to see. So I had the honor of showing it in Belgium, for example. Belgium was the nation that devastated Congo around the turn of the century. So a lot of its problems emerged or result from that. From that colonial legacy.
Yes. we are of course opening a new page of revealing our archives, and of course Portugal is a country of colonization, of Brazil too, and we are living this moment of reflecting and reinventing our ways of seeing and looking to the past.
It's about time.
Yeah.
Angela, do you have a question?
You were talking about the work that you made together with your friends, I can say, with Ben Frost and Trevor Tweeton. Can you explain how it is the process of working with the friends and collaborating with music, doing this transversality between, of course, languages, photography and cinema and audio, which is a strong impact when you put everything in hybridism.
No, it's you really have to let go and really trust your collaborators and give them the authorship that sometimes you don't want to let go of. They have to be really good. They have to be smarter than you are. And I'm very blessed to work with these two. Trevor Tweeton's incredible cinematographer, like one of the best. Very humble. But he's looked carefully at what I produced with my still photography and tried to translate that for the screen. And through this process, we worked together about 12 years now. It's almost a pre-linguistic relationship we have. I know what he's thinking before he usually doesn't say anything because he's so taciturn, but there's a real sympathy, and I think that we've built a real visual language together. And then Ben Frost entered the collaboration about 9 years ago in Congo. And then again, we worked on Incoming, which is, like, if I have time, I can talk about it.
No, it will be wonderful.
We're working again this last year in Brazil, up and down the Amazon rainforest, which is our third more sort of big, ambitious, immersive.
Wow! Can you explain?
Let me ask you a question. I want to ask a question on the side. So you come to Brazil a month ago, then you forget that you had a show in Bologna. What about your collaborators?
Yeah, no, I forgot the travel laws. I just wasn't aware of these restrictions that are very strict. I actually thought I could go to Belém and go down São Félix de Zingu and up to Altamira, which would have taken me 2.5-3 weeks, and make a lot of new art. And then I could just fly to Rome and then just start work. But I didn't realize that would be, I just couldn't do it because they're very strict about these bloody quarantines now. You have to spend 14 days.
Go ahead.
So I was working alone in that case with a fixer named Alessandro Falco, who lives, he's a photographer, a very good photographer, who lives in Belém. He's Italian, but he lives in Belém. And he's really helpful because he knows a lot of the places to go, and he speaks the language, and he's able to enter the psychology of these environmental criminals. It's quite difficult sometimes. The machismo.
Yeah.
Before you go into Belém, I'll go on my last question at least. Okay, you have a very prolific career, definitely. 41 years old. You've won so many awards, done so many projects. And I clearly have the sense that none of them are superficial. So it seems like you go like a missile in, and you go really deep. So very prolific. And this brings me to my question. So what are you working on now? I know that you've been to Brazil. We were going to meet. We didn't meet. So tell us about that.
Well, thank you very much for your kind words. It's a great honor to hear you say that. Thank you. Well, I'm going to skip through this project, which I don't think we really have time to get into. But
that project, you won the Pictet, right? That's actually where I got your telephone number from.
Oh, really? They gave you the number? Okay, yeah.
No, because I was in the first Pictet.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You were. I know everyone.
It's a nice group.
Friends. Yeah. Nice group. Yeah.
I got to sit on the jury for the following one after I won. It was an interesting process. A lot of political skullduggery.
Oh, anyway, definitely.
Yeah. So my new project in the Amazon is made with multispectral cameras that basically I figured out. Basically, again, I was really frustrated with the modest camera that I was forcing myself to use. I suppose I was frustrated with my chosen discipline, but really I was frustrated with myself. And in this case, as some of you may have traveled along Trans-Amazonic highway and seen the scale of the devastation, but it's truly extraordinary how much of the rainforest is being burnt in the summer months. It's some of the saddest landscapes I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of sad things, over the course of my career, and I really struggled to. Obviously, I really felt the world really needs to know about this, and there are a lot of photographers taking great pictures of these processes and environmental crimes, but after a while they all become the same. It's very hard to take an original picture that speaks to these crimes in a powerful way. And not only that, the scale of it is just beyond the scale of the camera, or even the limits of the human imagination, the limits of human language, because it's about climate change, and our entire climate it's bigger than we can really imagine. Some of these processes. So, taking all my frustration, and I began to research some of the I suppose technologies being used, and I realized that actually there's a really interesting technology sitting right on the crossroads between the crossroads sort of that tells the story in a really interesting way, or at least would allow me to unpack it for myself. So, as you're probably aware, we have groups like Map Biomass, Amazon in Brazil, who are doing amazing work. These are scientists who take imagery gathered by multispectral cameras, carried on satellites like this one in space. There's lots of them, and they take that data and they can unpack using geographic information system software. They can start to understand a lot about what's going on in the Amazon, not simply how many fires there are today, or how many there were this month, or how many there were this year compared to 10 years ago, which is really important information, but also all kinds of other things like the quality of the cloud cover, or the stress and degradation of the plants, and they can use all that data, the release of certain gases. They can use all that data to, in a very powerful ways, to model tipping points and help us to really understand how many more years we have until the Amazon starts to, eat itself, to automatically turn to savanna, which would be a massive disaster for the world, not just for Brazil, because of all that biodiversity would be lost, and all that carbon would be released from those wetlands and all those trees, of course. And that was really interesting to me. But those are the good guys. Then you get the bad guys, you see, and they're using the same bloody cameras. And these cameras are designed for agribusiness and mineralogy, and that's big bucks. Is a big industry which basically uses these advanced cameras to scan the landscape and to pinpoint through spectronomy, through reflectance data, multispectral reflectance data across a number of bands. My camera had 10 bands, but some of them have a lot more. They're called hyperspectral cameras, and you can then dial in that data into this GIS software, and you can pinpoint where the really valuable minerals are and how to get at them. And currently, in 2018, I believe Jair Bolsonaro, your president,
not mine. Not mine.
Let's not get political, but he passed a bill in 2018 promising to open up the indigenous reserves, the ancestral lands of the indigenous, to massive multinational mining companies. And so there was a rush at that time, and since, and it's probably still going on, to map analyze these lands, these indigenous territories, in order for these companies to lay stakes, mining stakes, which are already laid now. There's a lot of them have been a lot of this has been divvied up between these huge mining companies, and then Bolsonaro is now promising to allow them to mine on those reserves, which is absolute crime. It's an environmental crime. And this is all happening through multispectral cameras. And they're also used by agribusiness. Sorry, you have a question.
One technical question. So, okay, you're speaking about the cameras and the spectrum, etc. Where's the camera that you use? You do it by helicopter or drone? Or you're using satellite images?
Yeah, I use a drone. So I bought the one they make and sell to farmers.
Okay.
Because again, agribusiness it's not just mining; it's also it's actually largely agribusiness. We got 80% of the deforestation is the results of cattle farming. You have at least 50 million head of cattle in the Amazon. They all need.
I know many people that have cattle farms in Pará state. Many
fazendas, and that's an interesting part of the story, because it's also there's also a cultural prestige. Obviously, there's a lot of money to be made, but there's also a dream there, a cultural dream, which is about having the Toyota Hilux and the 500 or 5,000 cows and the fazenda. And that money could be made through tourism, ecotourism, or it could be sustainable in other ways. But I think that culture, that dream is. Yeah.
Brazil has this culture imbued in the upper level society that land is worth money. People will buy land over anything here. And that's really interesting. I was born in Brazil, but I have a European background. I grew up in Europe, where we have a very different approach to property of land. So this, at the height of my 46 years in this world, it really amazes me, how highly people value having land, more land than they could ever use, actually, And this is a society problem, really,
Yeah, and the Pantanal was another absolute disaster last summer. One of the protected parks, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. 80% of it burned in just a few months last year. 3 months. And I think 25% of the entire Pantanal wetlands are now gone. And a lot of these fires, they burn underground. So when the land dries out, the fire can burn through the dried up root systems under the soil. So you can't really see it in the same way, and it's very, very hard to fight. Here's a little video just showing the details. And the way to fight it, you have to build little trenches around it and isolate the fire. It's very laborious. I've met many groups of volunteers doing heroic work, trying to isolate just little patches. But when you travel around, just the scale of it is just bonkers.
It's absurd.
Here you can see, where it's gone pink. It's what the plants are stressed out. They're in the process of dying. They're already half burnt. Where it's nice, rich, lipstick red, the plants are still pretty happy. And then, of course, the green, the blue, and the blacks they represent death. And so along the river systems, you still get life, and a lot of jaguars and other wonderful animals are walking along, but they don't know. You can't see. They're not stupid, but they can't see the fire. So, as I said, the fire is underground. They walk across it, and their paws get burned. And I've seen jaguars in horrific pain in clinics, but also in the wild. And also other animals. Obviously, there's such diversity there in the Pantanal. But the interesting thing, I'm not sure if I have the slide of that fire. Oh, of course, illegal mining, gold mining, ravages the landscape and the river systems. There's a mineral ship working here, and it's a extremely rapacious process, all day, 7 days a week. These huge diesel engine ships are just sucking the riverbed and the riverbanks, and then sluicing it through these mats, which are then filtered with mercury to pull out the gold. Extraordinary amounts of energy and time and devastation just for a little golf ball of gold at the end of the week, you know. And this is going on up and down some of these rivers. This is the Crepori River in Para. There's a little town there called Creporizao, which is a fascinating place. It's like being in a Wild West or something. And this is it's an intensive feedlot. I think it's the biggest in Brazil. It has 40,000 cows or more at any one time. And you can see all those cows are being intensively fattened up before being slaughtered. So they're being force-fed, essentially. And of course, being force-fed, you produce a lot of shit. And that cow shit is going through those series of ponds in the middle of that sort of rib cage. So the colors are expressing aspects of sort of traces, indexical traces of the environmental processes that we're examining. And this is a Aldea Enawene Noe, which is
it's indigenous and indigenous tribes, I think.
Yeah, it's an indigenous tribe up there near Vilhena, in the north of Mato Grosso, and they live in a very different way to us. They live in this concentric circle, and they live in a very cyclical way with their environment, a very sustainable way, producing almost no waste. They don't eat red meat like us, like most of us. They eat fish and plants.
Totally sustainable, yes.
They do burn, as you can see, they do a little bit of burning around their village to clear the land, but they live very sustainably, and very little waste is produced. And every 20 years, the village moves to allow the land to replenish. So you see these rings from space or from the air of former villages that have been abandoned. It's a very small group of indigenous that were recently contacted in the 1960s by a missionary, I believe, and they only got electricity last year. And their road was improved only last year. So I'm concerned that a lot of the youth will start to become more enamored with city life in Vilhena, but hopefully they always remain there, because it's a absolutely very special place. Really, one of the most wonderful things to get in. Very hard to get to, very remote. But I suppose what this image tells us, in contrast with this image, is this is what Western man does to the land, and these lines, these contours, these shapes, these show us how we dominate the environment.
Yes, totally controlled.
And this kind of arrangement is not about domination and dominion and manifest destiny. It's about living with the environment.
Yes. So we are human side. It's totally against we are in the opposite side of what means, what is ancestral can be future, right? What I can say. The ancestrality could be, of course, our future. Ancestralism, it's what I'm saying.
We have a lot to learn from them.
Yes, definitely.
This is an interesting image because it shows us this, as I was saying before, the subterranean fire that burns in the Pantanal. So I don't know if you can see, but you might just be barely able to see a little pickup truck on the bottom right. And there's 5 or 6 guys working they're called Prefogo firefighters, and they work really hard, man. And I don't think they get much money for it either. But they were pumping water from the creek. There's a little pond there at the bottom right, and they're just sort of jetting that water out to the side of the road. But then I ran my drone up and made a map of this area, and I'm using the multispectral camera, and you can't really see the extent of the fire with the human eye in the same way. But when I use the software to dial in certain narrow bandwidths of reflectance data, I was shocked. All of a sudden, boom, I could see the front line of the fire on the left, which was totally evident. And it is a little bit pathetic because those guys are working their ass off, but the scale, the fire is already burned all that land, and the front line is far, far from them, and they're kind of working in the wrong part of the field. And even if they were working a bit further up, I don't think they could stop that. It's just so big, So the multispectral camera is allowing me to see aspects of these environmental processes and environmental crimes that you couldn't otherwise see. I'm using it as an artist, and I'm pushing the aesthetics always.
Mhm.
And I'm also I'm pushing metaphor as hard as I can, you know. But sometimes I'm able to work on a forensic level also, and this is really the triple punch. If you can get all three of those things working in one image, you know, that's a powerful image, and it's rare to do that. But that's sort of what my sort of goal with this project is to try to push to the limit on those three fronts.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I guess that's the end of my little presentation. So,
I barely have any questions left. So
Yes, wow, it was massive.
very complete.
Yes, very complete. You are really an entire artist. You are visceral, immersive, emotive, even aggressive, of course, but full of passion and love, of course. Yeah, congratulations.
Congratulations. And Richard, just for your information, you know that it's the Mario Cravonetto Institute that's promoting this festival. And it was created right after Mario Cravo's death in 2009. So when you were in Iraq, right? And our main goal, of course, besides maintaining and conserving his legacy and work, is promoting photography, you know, as a medium, as a language, as a way to bring people together. And, you know, this is why you're here. Very illuminating conversation. You know, thank you very much. I'm glad that you showed up. I was really worried.
don't worry, it's grand. Yeah. Sorry about the.
Yes.
But I guess I might have spent all of our time. But if anyone had additional questions,
all the questions that I got up here, you have answered all of them. So all the questions that I wrote down, you have answered. There was one that you didn't answer, but it's fine. I was going to ask if your work is reality or fantasy.
It's very, very real shit, man.
Yeah.
Stuff, I mean, but sometimes it's pushed into that literary space, and that's sort of imagined. Yeah.
Angela, any comments?
Well,
Closing comments?
I'm astonished about your work, and of course, I'm intriguing about what will be. Of course, you know, you are still young. What do you think you can give advice for all my artists and students and people are looking for us? What you advise for a young photographer that is starting a career?
I guess I'd say, be careful what you wish for. I mean,
you might just get it.
You might just get it. No, it's been an amazing journey in the last 20 years. I wouldn't change it, swap it for anything. But yeah, you know, sometimes it's nicer to have a more relaxed kind of a life with a family and two nice Labradors, and you know, I wouldn't mind that now. I'm getting old. It's
already.
I'm over the hill. But it's exhausting being a full-time photographer, especially photography, because it's so physical. But it's fun.
Yeah. Physically demanding in many ways. You know, my father, he suffered a car accident in 1975, and he was very young at the time, maybe about 30. But you know, we're a family of artists. I'm a third generation. My father was a second generation, so he started very early on, but when he finally had this terrible car accident, you know, it changed because he lost mobility, his full mobility of his body. It changed his photography completely. And the work that you do, definitely, you need to be, you know, on the healthy side. You need a physical condition, you know, to endure this type of work, definitely. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you once again. Just saying here in Portuguese, o trabalho do Richard Mosse está na nossa revista, our magazine, beautifully printed in matte paper. Your work is here in the back. Very nice. I love this picture. And you got your copy.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well done. It's lovely print quality, and thank you.
And it's even distributed for free, actually.
That's so heroic. People say that Brazil photo clubs are like the best in the world. There's a real sense of solidarity amongst people and community spirit.
It is.
Lots to discover.
Okay.
It's great that we have so love in common. I'm in Portugal now. We have this country, the tropics. So it's so important for us to have your expression and to give strength for a country that needs, of course, more light. And it's wonderful to be here, of course, with Christian Cravo, following this amazing photo festival, which is the 2nd edition, but it's, of course, anticipating a bright future. So it is really a great honor to be with you. And we all know that your art is on the edge of abyss, I think. And so it's
not just art, it's the whole world.
So that's it then. So I'm going to kick you out from the studio. Okay. I'm going to stay here with Angela.
Ciao.
Okay? Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Tchau, Richard. We'll be in touch. Então, a gente até perdeu a possibilidade de traduzir, né? Porque a conversa foi muito completa, muito
inteira, muito enriquecedora, sólida.
Eu ficava com medo de parar ele para traduzir, para ele não perder o ritmo, né? Eu joguei na sorte que a maioria das pessoas que estão nos acompanhando iriam acompanhar, né? O inglês dele, que esse inglês irlandês, né? Que fica um pouco mais difícil ainda de entender, né?
Não, mas foi maravilhoso. Eu acho que as imagens contam tanto, e então também é importante dar voz à leitura visual, e ele trouxe aqui um audiovisual muito bem preparado. Foi lindo demais, foi super esclarecedor, e foi impactante o trabalho da Amazónia. Foi muito importante ele ter revelado, e foi muito mais rico até que o próprio Uncoming, e foi muito positivo, muito feliz com ele.
Eu, pessoalmente, eu sou uma pessoa da prática, do visual. Eu sempre acredito mais na questão do fazer, de mostrar, né? Então, eu sempre olhei, assim, um pouco atravessado, com projetos muito embasados em teoria, né? A teoria, para mim, sempre era, né, tinha que ser muito bom. Só que, como você vai precisar de um embasamento teórico se o trabalho é tão bom, né?
Verdade.
Então ficava sempre aquele duelo, né? Pô, o que é melhor? É o embasamento teórico, é a proposta, ou é a imagem? No fim das contas, estamos falando de fotografia. Fotografia é imagem, é algo direto, que está na sua frente, né? Agora, com o trabalho do Richard, eu vou ser sincero, é um dos poucos trabalhos que tem um embasamento...
solidez teórica.
Um embasamento teórico que é tão forte quanto o trabalho.
Uma reflexão artística ao nível da dimensão estética do trabalho.
Aliás, o trabalho nem precisaria do embasamento teórico e nem a teoria precisaria do embasamento das imagens, né? Então...
É por isso que o trabalho conquista uma perfeição, não é? Inédita, avassaladora, e é por isso que ele anda de mãos dadas, obviamente, com a beleza, mas com o sofrimento, com a importância de se abrir brechas, de se abrir, enfim, espaço para o pensamento artístico, teórico e, obviamente, humano e social, que é muito poderoso.
Não, e também a questão da técnica, né? Ele vai desde uma câmera 8 por 10 polegadas, né? Que, para quem não conhece, isso é um trambolho.
É uma bazuca.
Olha, quem estiver na Bahia lembra dos fotógrafos de lambi-lambi, né? Aqueles fotógrafos que ficavam com aquelas câmeras de tripé gigantescas. Basicamente é isso aí, né? Obviamente de altíssima qualidade, chapas de 8 por 10 polegadas, são 20 por 25 centímetros. Mas isso, só em montar uma câmera dessa, colocar ela, alinhar ela para fotografar, você já toma um tempo imenso, né? E você fazer isso num ambiente como esse que ele se encontrou, né? Uma zona de conflito, uma zona que você tem que ficar de olho em tudo, é muito difícil. Realmente, ele está de parabéns. Trabalho incrível, incrível.
Punch stomach.
Isso.
Foi muito bom.
Muito obrigado, Ângela, viu, por participar. Sem você, não teria sido a mesma coisa.
Mas igualmente, eu digo mesmo, foi realmente uma surpresa muito boa, muito positiva, e felicito-vos pelo excelente festival e desejo-vos muita... Enfim, para já estão no momento de celebração, portanto já estão no momento de festejar, então que corra tudo lindamente. De facto, o trabalho que vocês estão a abrir é genial e, portanto, abram-se aqui as fronteiras para podermos...
Com certeza, com certeza. E daqui a pouco, tá, para quem ainda está aí, 6h30, a gente vai conversar com um fotógrafo nipo brasileiro, Hirosuke Kitamura. Ele é um morador aqui de Salvador, é um grande fotógrafo, uma pessoa muito intrigante, excelente fotógrafo. E depois dele, às 7h30, a Bettina Samaia, uma fotógrafa paulistana, e aí a gente vai encerrar o nosso festival. Mas ainda tem duas conversas bem interessantes daqui até lá. Então a gente se vê, tá? Vocês podem entrar no Facebook do festival, ou do Instituto, ou no canal do Instituto no YouTube, 6h30 em ponto começa. Ângela, muito obrigado, tá?
Obrigada, até breve.
Valeu, querida. Um beijo para você. Tchau.
Até breve, obrigada.
Tchau.